Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, an ongoing series on the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to our usual cast of characters: Michael Andron, Adele Packer, Lavana Tenen, and Daniel Gill. So today we're going to continue our discussion on the alphabet, Stan's work in terms of coming up with meanings based on his matrix. Let's put that up again. We've shown it many times, and I don't think I need to get into it again. If I'm going to assume people are not seeing this for the first time, so that you've seen this before. So today we're going to concentrate on these three letters: Zayen, Ayen, and Final Nun. So let's see what Stan has to say in the video that we've been using from 1990, where he was first working out these meanings. Let's see what he's got to say about them.
Zayen in Hebrew, pronounced Z, but really cognate to our letter G, is a weapon or an axe. If we go over to its English equivalent, if we replace the Z sound with the G sound, then it's a gain, or a gun, or to go on into, to go into. An axe instead of in the sense of an axis, not in the sense of a weapon, in the simple sense of an axe, but in the mathematical sense, an axis. Aim or a projection or a projectile, the thing thrown. It's a projection outward or inward, but it's the idea of projection. And so we're going to find that inward, it is the Ayen, the eye, meaning an eye or a well, cognate to our word eye or own or onion, to project in, to go on and into, to look in, an eye, a well, a sink, a sight line, the idea of symmetry. You look down the spin axis, the eye line, you see symmetry. And in the final level of the alphabet, the final nun is exactly the same as an N it means in English. It means to go on and on and on, to extrapolate, to continue outwardly forever. Instead of to look in the eye, one looks out and on, to the nth degree. In the same sense as nth degree. Nun, again, this idea of swimmer or fish, to the nth degree, on and on and on, to go on and out, it's continuous external extension and connection, outward connection.
Why the X?
Oh, the reason for using an X there is because there just wasn't any other letter that seemed to correspond. These are bad choices towards the end. X is an added letter in English. And the idea there is in mathematics, X can indicate an unspecified quantity. The idea of endless continuation. There just really isn't an X. It's convenient association. And I would not transliterate an X in English as an N, as a nun. I would rather look for a K or KS or a Kufra type sound. So X is not a real cognate. It's a stand-in. And if we look at our overall chart, we find, again, the general meaning of Zayen, Ayen, and Nun would be to go on. Zayen G, Ayen O, Nun O-N, or on, N. And it means, as I said, a projection. Direction, aim, what a seed does, a projectile.
Okay, so once again, these letter equivalents weren't as important later on. This was earlier in the work. So he did spend a lot of time looking for those English parallels. But again, we're also looking at these letters as verbs, as action letters. So Zayen, Zayen has, I mean, there's a lot of words that start with Zayen, as we know. Anybody want to talk about the letter Zayen?
Yeah, I'd like to see the hand gestures actually before I.
Zayen it's a projectile. It's going forward. Aleph Bet Gimel Daled Hey Vav Zayen. So since we're at Vav ahead of Zayen, I kind of fall down and forward into Zayen. Is that how you think of it, Lavana?
Yeah, it's a project and projectile projection, and That's a letter demonstration that Stanley frequently used in his live presentations because it's just a really easy one to grasp. I mean, it gets kind of obvious. The way that this letter is spelled in Hebrew is Zayen, Yud, and Nun final, which I haven't even tried for myself. Zayen and Yud, and yeah, that
So-
looks interesting.
So it's, get out of that bright light. So it's
Zayen,
Ayen,
Yud,
Yud,
and Nun final.
and final. Hands are up.
Hmm.
I love that the hands are up and what he said about Nun, but we'll get to Nun after we get to through
Yeah.
this. But yeah, Zayen, this moving forward, it's courage, stepping forward, projecting yourself
Mhm.
out there. You have an idea, but then you speak it. It's kind of like this very strong letter.
That sort of fits actually now that I look at it with Zayen Yud. If Yud is, in a sense, your personal will, then what you're doing is finishing projecting it out there. Yeah, that I hadn't thought of that.
I want to show one other video. This is because we haven't been doing this, and I probably should have been doing it. Let's take a look at Stan showing us the letter in the hand model. And this is from Dance of the Hebrew Letters, which is available on our website, meruvideo.com.
Now, Zayen, the next letter, means to project. So I come over my head and I make a projective motion. And if the camera will go to my left hand, you will see the Rashi Nachmanides Zayen rather clearly done there. Just forget about my fingers and just look under my thumb part. It's this part here. And I think you can, if I hold it just so, you'll see it. There it is. It's this part here. And that's my Zayen, projecting forward. Zayen, projectiveness, off the matrix chart. That's the meaning. Zayen is a grain, to go on, to grow, to gain.
Has more meaning when we see it with the model. I mean, it's just amazing how that works out, right? Michael, you had a comment?
Yeah, Zion numerically is the number 7, and sevens figure very prominently in Jewish thought. Obviously, Shabbat being the probably the biggest of them, but we have holidays that are 7 days. We have the 7 weeks between the Exodus and the receiving of the Torah. We have 7 times 7 years of Jubilee. 7 is all over the place, and Vav, the letter that precedes it, is a straight line, whereas Zayin, and it is described Kabbalistically, the Vav as the light coming down into the world, God's light coming into the world. The Zayin is the Or Choser, it's the light that returns. In other words, it's something that we receive that light and we project it outward, upward. The idea that the life force is in a continuous circuit. It's always there. And our goal is to receive it and to share it in some way. So, and it's the second part of this, when you get to the Ayen and put all 3 together, I have some other ideas on, but it's worth pointing out that Zayin is not only weaponized. As a matter of fact, the Vav is seen as the male, which is the most phallic of letters, but the Zayin is curved and it has a crown on top of it and is often seen as the feminine energy. And both by the curve and simply the physical female body is more curved than the male. And when the 2 get together, they become the Chet, the letter that we'll get to next time. So I don't want to overdo the weapon side,
Mhm.
because projecting energy is not always as a weapon.
Right.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I mean, there's a consciousness part of it.
Right.
It's even seen as a scepter, because the thing on the top is not like a yud, as it appears to be on the top of a lot of letters. Like an aleph has a yud on one side and a yud on the bottom side, one on the top, one on the bottom. Whereas the Zayen is a crown. It's sitting, dead middle of this piece of the letter in the Ashurit print.
Yeah.
Not so much in the
Right.
Rashi print, but
That's what I was going to say.
yeah.
To remind people.
And but it has that idea of crown, and of course Shabbat is the Sabbath queen. And so we have that Zayen is like, there were 6 days and there was a seventh, which was it was like the first 6 were the shooting out, if you were, and then the rest, I don't mean the remaining amount, but the period of rest that is Shabbat comes in with the 7. So it's got kind of almost opposite meanings to it, but definitely is an important representation. And that number 7 certainly accounts for that. That was it.
Interesting you say that, because I did a little research on this, and I looked at Rabbi Monk's book, and the Book of Letters, both of these. First one, the Wisdom in the Hebrew Alphabet. Both of them just concentrated on that, what you just spoke about, on the letter, on the number 7. Didn't get into much else about the meaning of the letter, as Stan does. There's no talk about projection, or because they're not talking in verbs like Stan is. But it was interesting that both of them, especially Rabbi Monk, just the whole thing is just about the letters, the number 7, and that which is important. But I found it interesting, whereas the next letter, Ayen, they spent a lot of time talking about the eye and sight and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So
Zayen, we often, we're so focused on the world that's down, down here, that we forget that there's a world. We never forget. It's not even on most people's minds, which I guess it makes sense. We get caught up in this world, but there's a world above, and so we often think of our influence only in terms of what's going on down here, out here. What Zayen, the letter is telling us is, no, you're focused out here, but your job is to project above. The whole motion is like pulling in and going up, as the focus. We think like, well, the main thing is like, what am I doing here? And I got this and I got that, whatever. And actually, Zayen is a beautiful letter, because it's teaching us with these gestures, these beautiful gestures, that actually our job is we're like, this isn't actually the main place. It's an important place, and we're thrilled to be here. But actually, what we're doing kind of causes this thing above. And if you look in classical Kabbalah, there's a whole idea of like, no one may be looking at you, but your thoughts and your intentions and what you're doing is super important, even if no one notices. We live in this world of like, well, did anyone notice? Did anyone like it? Did I get someone that noticed it? As if that's the arbiter of importance. Actually, it's not. Actually, in terms of like a lifetime, it's not necessarily as important as we think it is. Although what comes out over many years tends to be a lot of important things that sometimes got overlooked. But the real import is like the person's intention. The person has an intention to do something good. If one, again, I hope for millions of people to download my records, but if one person notices, or no one notices, or a million people notice, and whatever, it doesn't necessarily change what the person's intention was. So if you have a rotten intention when you're, say, writing a piece of music or doing something else, even if you get, wow, it went viral, it doesn't really matter, because your intention's awful. So who cares? You didn't do anything really.
Mhm.
And the opposite's also true. Hopefully those things with good intentions and with good kavanah, you know, is very, kavanah is also the word for direction. What is the direction you want? What are you actually thinking about when you're doing that thing that you're doing? And that's super, super important. That's Zayen. So it's not projecting out, it's actually projecting in or up when you spell out the word. So
Yeah, and when you spell it and you gesture it, that's exactly what you're doing.
yeah.
Because the self-referral of Yud, it's like, is what you're doing out here important? Are you so important? No, it's this, right? It's our connection above. And that's, we could make a drash on just how the letter is spelled and everything you just said.
I think we just
Like,
did.
what's important?
Mhm. Yeah, again, could it be like consciousness projecting? And that could go either direction. You talk about if you have a bad intention writing a piece of music, if it's ego driven and you just want to make a lot of money and you're coming up with a tune that you think people will like because it's going to bring you money, that's the wrong intention. Whereas you don't care about how much it's going to make you, you're just bringing it in, you're almost projecting it from a higher consciousness out into the world. And
Yeah, well, and there's an example. I mean, everyone's heard of Paco Bell's canon, but outside of his canon, he's really not listened to anymore. No one cares, right? I mean, even the canon is so cliche at this point that like it's like musicians roll their eyes, like, okay, another wedding, another canon, whatever, you know. And it's beautiful, but like, but at the time of Paco Bell was also Bach, and Bach was really unknown as a composer. He was known as an organist. Some people, he writes a little, you know, but he wasn't known as a composer until much later. And that's, as you mentioned, Mendelssohn kind of brought him to the world. But it's just funny because, you know, Bach had incredible intention and incredible kind of focus in his writing. And at the time, people looked over it. And Paco Bell, obviously, you know, I mean, he was a great composer, but it seems to me, you know, he had an audience and he was writing for the audience. He was getting paid well. And so
And
it's
you
just,
can hear that in his music.
yeah.
right.
Yeah. So
Well,
intention wins out in the long run, which is something. So the very thing, projection means like, you know, if you're projecting up, then you have this wide arc of projection that goes over a lot of things. And if you're projecting out, it's projected and then it's gone.
You know, and back to a discussion from a couple of weeks ago. Again, if you're projecting out, you're thinking of the time that you see. If you're projecting up, well, up is a whole lot of things, including from Bach to us, you know, the time factor. You're projecting into timelessness where anybody can access it.
Oh, wow, yeah.
no, I think we can still say the same thing about Stan in terms of his
I hope so.
research. Yes,
Oh,
definitely, without
definitely,
question.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
look at the intention there. He had opportunities where he could have made a lot of money on this work, and he rejected it because it wasn't the right thing. It wasn't the right direction. So he's definitely in that category with this work. Let's go on to the next letter. Okay, so we're going to look at the Ayen, and here's the Ayen with the hand model.
Now, Ayen means eyes, sight line. And again, the Ayen is right here. Put my hands alongside my eyes like blinders on a horse. And in my right hand, I see the letter Ayen. And you can see quite clearly the letter Ayen in my left hand. Getting the angle right may be a little tricky for the camera. Let's see if we can do that. No, I have a problem tipping it. Something like that gives you an Ayen shape. Most people who know the Ayen will see it there. There it is. Very good Ayen.
Very good Ayen. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah. So Ayen has a clear definition in terms of sight, eyes. A lot we can say about that. Let's show it. Yeah, go ahead.
It also means well. So it's like you have a context of something that's quite deep. You know, you have sight line, but you're also, if you can think of looking into somebody's eyes, which is like the well through which you see their soul, for example, you know, just to get poetic about it. The Ayen also has that meaning. And so when you start to think about, well, okay, here's the two standard meanings for this letter. How do they relate to each other? And that's where you start to get the concept of something that goes very deep. Anyway, just a comment.
Yeah,
Adele,
I think of that also, just that Ayen is your eyes projecting out, but it's what are you taking in? So the well is within us that are, and it's insight, right? It's like what we see and how we bring that in and integrate is all in Ayen.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah,
And
it also-
also,
in either direction.
I'm just remembering that Stan said wherever your eyes see, you could have it. So your arms could be all the way here or looking up even, that wherever you want to place your hands, you can, even though this was where he left that.
He did it here,
definition.
but it's sight line, you know.
Right. So we use that in the dance that were when Ayen, we moved with it, which was really beautiful, just to have a letter that could move was so. Yeah, and I think what you're taking in that well is really big because it's a silent letter. So it's reminiscent of something larger that we can't even say.
Mhm.
there's also a point of focus when you put your hands up like that, and if your eyes are concentrating on a point,
Yes.
and then you're using your peripheral vision so that you get the whole scope. It's almost a way of meditating on a higher level with eyes open. And that's how you see the Zayen with your peripheral vision. It's not in front of you, it's over
Right.
here.
And it's
And
almost like blinders, isn't it? Like horses
blinders, that's right.
blinders.
Exactly.
That's
But
right.
blinders are also a way to really see, really
Right.
focus your
Focus.
attention.
That's right. That's right.
Again, this and the spelling of this letter is Ayen Yud Nun Final. So you've got Ayen Yud Nun Final, which again, if you're going up this way, it's also deep if you think about it. That's philosophically, spiritually, if you're going into the spiritual world, the difference between up and deep, there isn't any.
Right. That's right. And so Final Nun is our next letter, actually.
Before you race
Yes,
on
go ahead.
there,
Go ahead. Yeah, Michael.
before you race on, I know Stan loved translingual puns, but in this particular case, it's interesting to note it's not just a verbal pun, but it's a physical pun. The word I, E-Y-E, is E, E, and a Y. Ojo in Spanish is O with a J and O. It spells out the look of the letter Ayin, which has two eyes and a brain stem. The two nerves going back to the brain to interpret what you see. It is also, as you just mentioned, one of the two silent letters, which is why very often you'll see when somebody's doing a Dvar Torah on it, they will interchange the Aleph and the Ayin to teach a lesson because they're both silent letters. And one of the examples of that was one when I do a bris, I very often will mention the fact that the word in Hebrew for foreskin is or la. It's one word, which if you divided it into two could be or lashem. It's a skin. Ayin vav resh is skin. The word or with an aleph, if you interchange it, is light. So you remove the skin for Hashem to reveal the inner light for Hashem. You have to remove the veil, as it were. So Aleph and Ayin are very often used as a pair going back and forth. And the we talked about the Zayen being a vessel that holds light. And when you get to the Ayen, it's in a sense, it's a vessel that projects light. So if you're looking at the physical gestures that he's there, it's a full story. It's coming in, it's going out. And it's not just Lavana, as you mentioned, it's also fountain,
Yeah. Mhm.
which indicates something that
thing.
bring it in, hold it,
Mhm.
and then bring it out.
Yeah. So if you think about it, in terms of vortices, it's really the same. It's the
Same
same
thing, yes.
shape factor. It's the same thing. And actually, back like to one sentence previously that you said, just a little incidental fact. One thing that we discovered in our research about this stuff, and unfortunately, I have no idea what the source was at this point, but that in the ancient world, they generally thought that light was projected out of the eye as opposed to going into the eye, and that was how vision occurred. So that's an interesting thing to think about contextually when you also think about Ayen meaning eye and what the eye does.
I
It's
remember, I
interesting.
remember, I remember a conversation with both of you about that many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stan was explaining it, and I remember thinking, and I still think about so he said, it's not actually true, the light
Mhm.
doesn't actually, come out of our eyes. It doesn't happen that way. But what's interesting is in consciousness, it kind of does. It's like like you're sitting there, and all of a sudden, someone's looking at you, and you turn around, and you see the person who's looking at you, because in consciousness, there's some sort of something happens that is projecting, even though physically it's not. So you can feel the projection towards you, and oftentimes it's uncanny. You'll turn right towards the person who's looking at you.
Mhm.
It's like you can sense the direction, and so it's just that I just remember that. I remember thinking about that when we had that conversation.
And light
Well,
is a metaphor for consciousness, or as more than a metaphor, as a
Right.
way that we can conceive of consciousness. I mean, that's like real common wherever you look.
by
So
the way,
yeah, wow.
there is an
Mm.
output. There's a meditation that people do, and there's a science behind it, where if you go out first thing in the morning and you spend 5 to 10 minutes in sunlight, I don't mean looking at the sun, but just taking in sunlight, it actually goes into the only part of the brain that's not in the cranial vault, which is in the back of the eyes.
Oh yeah.
There's a retinal nucleus back there. And that message takes the light that comes in, the actual photons of light, takes them to the hypothalamus, which is the regulatory clock for the body, which is why moving through time zones causes jet lag. And when the hypothalamus gets the message, it sends a message to every single cell in the body using, I think it was cortisol, which we think of as, oh, that's bad, that's stress. But it's not, because it's a chemical that stimulates energy and focus, the exact things that you're talking about with the eyes. But it sends it because every cell in your body has a clock in it. And when they're all set to one thing, you have more energy, more focus, more of everything you want to attack the day. And so there is an output. It's not necessarily going out like beams of light in a cartoon, but it is going out to every cell in your body and getting everything to work together in harmony. So they say if you go out first thing in the morning, the earlier you go, once the sun is up, the better it is, because it then starts to count. And at the end of about a 16-hour cycle, it says, okay, we're shutting down now. Okay, it's nighttime. And it starts with the output of melatonin, so that it improves your sleep, it improves your disposition. And doing that in the morning, the yogis had a whole set of yoga postures called the salutation to the dawn, which would be done in the morning, preferably bathing in the sunlight, taking it in through the eyes, and imagining it distributing it through the entire body.
Yeah, another perspective of this is we haven't talked about this too much, but is the eye chakra. And the it has to do with the third eye, which is something we don't discuss a lot here. It's part of the Eastern tradition. Has a lot of meaning, but it really comes down to we're not really talking about eye, we're talking about insight, and sight in general. So I think that's more of the operative word in terms of defining the letter Ayen, in terms of sight in so many different ways. But let's move on to the final Nun.
One last thing on Ayin, because it's going to connect with all three letters, is which is the most famous Ayin in Hebrew? There is one Ayin.
Yeah.
It's more famous than any other Ayin.
It's the large Ayin.
It's the large Ayin at the end of the word Shema.
Shema, correct.
In the Shema, the Ayin is large and the Dalet is large at the end of Echad.
Yeah.
Which spells out the word aid, witness, or inverting it, da, which means to know. The extra sphera of the sphirot in Kabbalah is da'at, which is right where that third eye of insight is inside the head. Some say it's pituitary, some say it's pineal. I don't think it's either one, based on the physicist that I did a lot of research with on chakras. And he felt it was something separate from the chakras. And it fits where da'at is, because that's the one that always has the dots around it, because you don't count it as one of the 10. Or you count it instead of Keter, which is the crown. Mm-hmm. So that Ayin becomes really important. And it's interesting that the Ayin is drawn big in a word that means hear. Shema means listen. And yet the Ayin, which is something that sees, not hears, is the large letter there. There again, the Aleph and the Ayin kind of play that little game.
Right.
On the other hand, if you think of Ayin as meaning well, then what you could be doing is hearing to the depths of your soul.
Yes.
Right. Okay, let's go on because we're limited on time today. Dell has to go. We all have at some point. Let's go on to Final Nun. So we don't have Stan didn't do the final letters on that video because he hadn't worked them out yet. If you do the hand gesture for the Final Nun, which you showed us before, I'm curious if you actually do see the Final Nun in the hand model. There it is.
Yeah, you do. You do.
So the Final Nun, which means to the nth degree, on and on. You know, I wonder if, well, go ahead, Lavana.
No, I'm just trying to think. I don't think we ever recorded him doing that.
No, we didn't do the final letters.
Like this, which would be sort of like this. But I'm working.
You'd have to be holding it up and looking up.
Yeah, holding it up, looking up.
Yeah, to see.
Yeah.
It's a little complex on the final letters.
Yeah.
Very
I'll have to go back and study and take a look at the photographs. We did take photographs for those little bitty pictures that are in our book.
Yeah.
What I'm looking at. But I have the photographs and it was me, so I remember how
I'll find that. We'll put that up because we've got a couple more final letters coming up. So
it's interesting that the Final Nun is almost identical to a Zayen.
Yeah,
which is part of this particular line more than a number of the others. I mean, there are only 9 sets of 3, but more than most of them, you can see that word. Ayin, Zayen, Ayin, Nun, the Nun is described, the Ayin is described as an elongated Nun. That's curved down with a Vav coming from the other side. It actually, if you flip the letters around, spells out the word Ozen except Ozen means ear, but is spelt with an aleph. Think of the aleph and the ayin switching. And here you have something that is about seeing, and yet it spells out the word, if you flip the letters, spells hearing as well. It's not just seeing with your physical eyes, clearly. It's pointing to a higher, wider, a higher superconscious state. More than, I mean, all three letters point to that. And it's kind of interesting to see that as we get to the end of the letters. In other words, it may start off more basic. Oh, it's the poor man running after the rich man running after the poor man to give him charity. Very down to earth. Whereas as we get to these final sets, we're looking up and out.
We're now at the physical.
That
That
was almost kind of a conscious choice, in that I don't actually remember as he was discovering the final letters, but as I recall, he was looking for some extension of the original meaning.
Right.
And so extension mean, okay, extend the arms, see what happens. And I just took a look at my chart again and see that, in fact, in terms of the font that is visible with the hand model, the Zayen and the Final Nun are actually quite similar. The gestures are quite different. Obviously they're different in direction. So that it's interesting that in both of the fonts that we're discussing, those two letters are actually physically similar.
And
true.
Then when we talked about the letter Nun, and Nun spelled out as Nun, Final Nun. And the Nun was the hidden letter in the Rubik's Cube, the connector, the nexus. And so we're taking that and expressing it on and on and on and on.
The spelling of the whole word is beautiful because you have the nun that's in the middle, and then have a vav and then go up. So the whole thing is moving up, and it's weaving, right?
That's beautiful.
It's really beautiful. I did. Nun was one of the featured letters because the spell, just the gesturing of it was so beautiful. And the idea of closing your eyes to see that sort of spirit within, and yet then to project and see above to finish the.
Oh, did I get that wrong? Is it Nun Vav, Final Nun?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I've seen it for the Final Nun. Stanley said Nun Vav Nun Final.
Yes.
But for the regular Nun, he just said Nun Nun. So I'm not sure. I find that interesting, and I have no answer to the question.
Right. Well, we did spell it Nun Vav Final.
Yeah. Well, that's
yeah.
Well, there's an interesting thing with this sequence of letters, which is if you take out the middle one, so if you go from the highest to the lowest or whatever it is, from the lowest to the highest, it spells Naz, which I think doesn't mean anything. But if you go from top to bottom, it spells Zan, which is very important, which means to sustain or sustenance. And as in Hazan et Hakol, the one who sustains everything. So the Zan is very interesting. So it's mizonot is another one, the word for like just little things that give you sustenance.
Of course, Birkat Hamazon. I mean, it's the same use of the word. Yeah.
Yeah, with the vav in the middle.
Birkat Hamazon is the grace.
Grace after meals.
After eating something, to say thank you.
Yeah, which, by the way, is the Talmud relates is a tour through Jewish history, as each paragraph was written earlier and earlier, and then successive generations added on to it. That's an aside, but what's interesting about sustenance? So this is sustenance, but with an ayin in the middle. like, which is fascinating. Like in the middle of what sustains us is kind of like our connection to an outlook, or what we,
Mhm.
how we, the overview, kind of the well from which we see things, or
Yeah, I like that.
we take in the world, or we,
Mhm.
so it's like those things are always connected, like whatever, whatever turns you on, you can tell a lot about yourself. It's not a judgment call. I'm just saying it's an meaning whatever you get excited about, really excited about, that gives you clues as to who you are, what sustains you. I mean, obviously, there are people who, I don't know if there's anyone who doesn't like pizza, but probably there are some people which the first two letters spell za, which is obviously the Torah's intention of codifying pizza as one of the primary sustenance.
Well, and the letter pay
Purim's
is
coming,
mouth.
so
The letter pay is mouth. So
well,
yeah,
za,
take the whole
za is
thing
an
and put
abbreviation
it in
for the
your
whole
mouth.
world,
Yeah,
calls pizza
yeah.
za.
Yeah.
So, but sorry, Purim's coming. I can't help it. So it's almost
Yeah,
Purim.
it's tough.
So the holiday of frivolity, which is my favorite. I feel like I live there. But anyway, so we have this Ayen, and so you can tell a lot about how a person is, and about how yourself. And one of the primary things going on here is I think self-awareness, a promotion of self-awareness. It's not, in religious culture, which is the outside of spiritual, I think, practice. Religious culture is like the outside of spiritual practice. So in religious culture, it's all about judging, right? But that's just the beginning. You start judging yourself. It can be very unhealthy. It's not such a great thing. But what should happen is that you take away the judgment, and you start just being aware. Oh, why am I like that? And so this concept of like looking at what sustains you, it's almost like you have to unravel it, or understand it. This has to do with, again, like whatever this lifetime's about, wherever it's supposed to be going. That's really important, and I feel like all of these columns have such like tremendous like life meaning. Each one just teaches us something, and to me, this one teaches us like be aware of what sustains you, not in a judgmental way, just in a way so you can kind of mark your progress or lack of, or whatever it is.
And let it out to the nth degree.
Yeah, and we'll just follow it, because it's once you're aware of something, it changes that thing, as we know from the double slit experiment. Once you're aware of something, it starts to change. So it's not like, oh, this is so bad, I've got to change my behavior, and how do I do that? It's like, well, just be aware of it. Like, this is where you're at, and that alone will like becomes more organic. There are many ways to kind of hack your own system. This is big today. Spiritual hacktivism. I don't know. Like you're hacking whatever, trying to take shortcuts to improve yourself. And the bottom line is you can't, as my grandmother used to say, you can't jump higher than your stomach. Like it's a great phrase, Yiddish phrase. You can think about it. You can jump, but your stomach goes with you. Like, so what you want to do, right, is be aware of it. And once you're aware of something, then it starts to change organically, and it starts to change naturally, and then real change can happen. But if you try to rush it, if you try to hack it, and you try to go beyond, and that you not only do you go backwards, you go behind, because your nature reacts to things which aren't so natural, obviously, because it's who you are, and so you can't force yourself. So I think this piece really is teaching us to learn to be aware without judgment. That's kind of the root of nearing the end of the cycle of the alphabet.
Yeah. So yeah, I invite our audience to look at these three letters, do a little bit more research, and find other connections. There are multiple ways of looking at these, and we're all exploring them. Coming up, we've got two more columns. They're going to be interesting because the het pay and final pay, the tet, the zadi, and the final zadi. So we have extensions of the letters themselves in the same column. So that'll be interesting to play around with. But we've run out of time for today. So we thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.